meeting some of the smartest founders at the very early stages of their life cycle is a different thrill altogether. When you are evaluating early stage, you are less focused on the downside and you are looking at, my downside going in is known as 1x, whatever is the initial check that I write in, but I should not give up on the 50x, 100x that potentially can come out.
Hi, this is Michael Waits, and welcome back to India Game Changer. Pratip Mazumdar, a partner and co-founder at Inflexor Ventures, is with us today. Pratip, thank you so much for coming on the show. Before we jump into the main part of our conversation, let's give our listeners a little bit of your background for some context.
Sure. Thanks, Michael, for inviting me to your show. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I am Pratip Mazumdar. I have been part of Inflexor Ventures. I have been investing in India for over 2 decades. Started my career way back in the early 2000s, working with one of the blue-eyed technology boys from India called Infosys Technologies. Thereafter, ended up doing my MBA from IIM Mumbai and my securities law from Government Law College in India.
Wow.
Thereafter, I was part of the investment banking team at State Bank of India investment banking team, looking largely at capital markets, M&A. Post that, I was part of the Asia private equity team for Babcock and Brown, part of their Asia team based in Mumbai. While we were raising capital for our Asia-focused fund, Lehman Brothers happened. Obviously, so the world turned topsy-turvy.
A little bit, yeah.
Within a few hours, and we ended up winding down our Asia fund thereafter. Post that, I ended up joining IDFC Alternatives, which is an India-based alternate asset manager focused on real estate, private equity, and infrastructure. Was with IDFC Alternatives for almost 10 years, looking at late-stage private equity investing and buyouts in India. Sometime in the late 2018, 2019, IDFC Alternatives was acquired by GIP, Global Infrastructure Partners, and I transitioned into GIP India at that point of time. That has always been my private equity journey, right? While I was at IDFC Alternatives acted as an anchor investor, backing 2 individuals who were Mr. Jatin Desai and Mr. Venkat Vallabhini. They are my current co-founders and partners at Inflexor Ventures. So I came in touch with them early 2015, 2016 when they were raising the first fund. And my erstwhile firm, IDFC Alternatives, anchored that fund and acted as a LP. My association began with the current team for, since 2015, 2016. First, as a nominee of IDFC Alternatives, helping Jatin and Venkat raise incremental capital. I was part of the investment committee team. So that's broadly how my journey started, from being an engineer to a finance and an investment professional, to eventually moving from private equity to early stage investing, which some may call to move into the dark side of investing.
The dark side.
Given that there are relatively less valuation benchmarks, there are a lot of companies who are not yet profit making the way we used to see it in buyout transaction or private equity transactions. So many of people consider that to be the dark side of investing.
Can I ask you this? Because I have my own opinion, and I just want to get yours first, though. What gets an engineer, a trained engineer, interested in investing where, and again, let me just go with this for a second and tell me where I'm wrong, right? Because I'm not always right. But engineers are very detail-oriented. They're very specific about the things. The outcomes are tested. They kind of know what they're getting when they're done, right? There's a scientific method around it, right? Where you test, you iterate, and then if you're wrong, you have a hypothesis, right? And if you're wrong, you go back and you change your hypothesis. Investing is a little bit of science, but a lot of art as well. So what gets an engineer like you interested in investing?
Great question. A lot of people has asked me this over a period of time, and your articulation of what engineering is all about is absolutely correct. That particular skill set and approach helps in making capital allocation when you are ending up investing in a transaction.
Yeah.
Now, while you are making that capital allocation, the point that you mentioned about testing your hypothesis, arriving at an outcome, and then iterating back are essentially the various scenarios, which is more like an art. It will pan out in your investment life cycle. And when you are doing that capital allocation, what kind of probabilities you are assigning to various scenarios and how you are allocating capital, the basic foundational block used in engineering, as you well articulated, is applicable for each of these scenarios. And that's the reason a lot of people from an engineering background use that skill set in the investing field. And I would say there is another field other than engineering where a lot of people have made a huge impact in the field of investing, which is people from the legal background.
Ah, fair enough. And look, this the reason why I asked you this is because I wanted to hear it in your own words. But I agree, actually. I think engineers make some of the best investors because of the way they look at problem solving and the way they also understand that their first hypothesis may not always be right, but they're comfortable iterating from the wrongness, if that's okay to say, and to then get to the bottom of the funnel to become right. Whereas I think most normal people are so uncomfortable with being wrong that they don't even want to make the bet to begin with. But I think engineers end up being really good at this because they're super comfortable going, yeah, that was a bad idea. Ah, but I have another idea and let me test that. Is that fair?
Yes, absolutely correct. Because it's not a perfect life or a perfect world.
Yeah.
There are only certain things which you can control. Most of the things you will not end up controlling. So, how do you take care of those situations as and when they arise, and how do you adapt to it becomes very important because that determines the eventual outcome. And that's the way Warren Buffett says, right? You are always dealt a deck of cards in your hands, and you need to play the game that you have been dealt with.
Exactly.
That's what the game is all about.
Let me share with you like a really, what I considered a really kind of mind-changing event for me. When I was on the portfolio trading desk at Morgan Stanley in Tokyo, we hired a guy, a software engineer, or an engineer, right, to join the trading desk. And one of the things he said to me, which I can never get out of my mind, is engineers are really good at minimizing noise, right? And finding signals. That was probably 15 years ago, and I can't stop thinking about it. This idea of like, there's plenty of noise out there in the investment world for sure. And the idea is just to minimize all that noise. And if you can find the signals, you win. Anyway, I thought it was kind of interesting. Can you talk to me about the significance of early stage investing? This is one of my favorite parts. I'm going to call it the curve just because I used to be a treasury trader, right? So I think about like the early part of the curve. I know it's not really like that, but that's just what I like to call it. Talk to me about why like investing at the early stage of that curve is so important for startups and why it's the most interesting part for you as well.
Let me, answer in two parts.
Please.
One, what's the broad framework to look at any investment, and how does early stage investment fits into the scheme of things?
Yep.
Right now, irrespective of whether somebody is doing early stage investing, growth investing, late stage private equity buyout, you typically will always focus on three things: A, the team slash founder; B, the market size; C, the valuation. These three are common irrespective of which stage you are investing in.
Fair enough.
The only thing where your framework changes when you are evaluating companies at different stage is the risk framework.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you are evaluating early stage, you are less focused on the downside and you are looking at, my downside going in is known as 1x, whatever is the initial check that I write in, but I should not give up on the 50x, 100x that potentially can come out. Whereas when you're doing a private equity or a buyout transaction, your focus is how do I minimize my downside? So the framework of evaluating a transaction when you're doing early stage versus any other stage is just on the risk framework and how you are looking at downside. Everything else remains the same. Now, coming back to your question, what is it on the early stage investing which attracts somebody like me, or what is there to look forward to? I would say meeting some of the smartest founders at the very early stages of their life cycle is a different thrill altogether.
It is indeed. Sorry, go ahead.
Right. And while you engage and interact with them, and many a times early stage founders, I would not like to bias any view, but typically when you look at early stage founders in normal circumstances, they are relatively young people.
Okay.
In some cases where history has shown, a lot of people even in their late 50s start a company or a venture, but they will be handful of them. Predominantly they are people who are relatively young, so they are not only smart, they are young, and you can easily compare their view of the world versus my view of the world when I was at that age.
Yeah.
And that shows the progression both in maturity, thinking, and the view of the world, how it has changed, say, when I was in my early 20s versus now.
Yeah.
When you meet some. So that's again kind of a reflection from where you can learn a lot, and it helps you grow as an individual and as a person a lot, because many times people say, oh, I don't relate to that guy because he's a decade older than me or a younger than me. You don't know how to adapt to it, right? But in my line of job, that's another thrill that I get, because you get to learn and reflect on those learnings.
Yeah.
So these two things are extremely important, and other than the third aspect being a lot of new things are coming up every day.
Yep.
People are trying to solve some hard problems over a period of time. and it just opens up your mind to a different kind of a thinking, if I have to say so. These are the three things which attracts me.
You just said the word new things, the words new things. Did you read that book, by the way?
No, I have not.
Oh my God, you have to read this book. You'll look it up later. There's a book called New
Okay.
Things. You have to read it. It's so good. I want to follow up on some of the stuff you said. I've done thousands of recordings with startup founders and investors. Okay. And I feel like the way I evaluated a startup founder when I did my first recording versus now is like completely different. And I kind of feel like, and I'm curious what you think about this, I kind of feel like after having like an hour-long conversation with a founder, I can tell like what the percentage, what's the right word to say here? What the possibility, the probability of them succeeding is just by that first conversation. Because I've had so many of them. I'm sure you have as well. And I'm curious if you have the same feeling, like where you meet somebody and you're like, the idea is good, but that guy can't build this thing. Whereas maybe you feel like the idea is not great, but this guy can definitely build something great. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. Not only that, we have also end up meeting people whom you think he's an absolutely great person, but he's building in the wrong space.
Yeah,
He
yeah,
should have
yeah.
built something else in some other space and you would have been hugely successful.
Right.
And you give that feedback also to that founder saying, look, you are absolutely great, but just that the market that you have chosen or the problem that you've chosen, we don't think is the right problem. You will be 10x, 20x more successful if you just choose a different problem because you have all the right ingredients. So all the two conditions plus this, I think definitely comes out from the first meeting itself. So you know there's a very differentiating factor.
Absolutely. I get the feeling though when I meet these people, I'm like, okay, this guy is definitely going to build something big. And you're right, maybe not in this sector. And I feel like telling them, like, maybe try over here where there's a much bigger opportunity. I'm sure you do this too. I'm curious what you think about, like, because you're investing at the earliest stages, what are the conversations that you have? What are they like with some of the founders? Like, what are the key things that they should think about? Do you know what I mean? When they're raising money, particularly at the earliest stages, because you're right, it's the riskiest time to raise capital, yeah? For both sides.
Yeah. So the first and foremost thing that any founder, whether the founder is through a warm connect or a friend or an unknown person, I tell the founder or I ask the founder, are you sure you want to raise money?
Really? Why? Why do you ask?
See, the reason is because till that point of time, till the time that you have not raised external capital or institutional capital,
Yep.
you are the owner of your own time. You are answerable only to you.
Exactly. Go ahead. I like this. Go ahead.
Once you raise capital, which is an external capital, not friends and families and all,
Right.
you are answerable and you be better sure of it when you take that money. You should not think about it later. Okay, why did I take this money?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's the first point. Second, I always tell them, okay, look, getting in and out of a marriage is very easy, relatively.
Relatively.
Getting in and out of an investment or capital from an investor is extremely tough.
Yeah, I mean, getting out of a cap table is impossible. It's not impossible. Boy, it's super hard, right? Restructuring's super hard.
Yeah, even if things are good between you and your spouse or your partner, you can have an amicable way of moving away. You can agree to disagree and things will be still fine between your families and everything.
Yeah.
But if you don't get along with your investor through the good times and the bad times, there's no way anybody will come out of that relationship fine. So you better be sure first, A, you are ready to take money so that you are answerable to the other person. You better be sure what kind of investor you want on your cap table. You should be able to see eye to eye. You can agree to disagree both through good times and bad times.
How do you control for personality? This is the thing you're talking about, right? In other words, how do you control for this feeling of this team is definitely going to build something amazing, but I don't think I can get along with them? Do you know what I mean? And you're kind of sure that they're going to build something big, but how do you control for that when you're thinking, do I give them the money, but it's going to be a constant battle back and forth, but it's still valuable? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so my limited experience and learning has been it's better not to get into the deal at that point of time.
Okay,
If you
that's
think
interesting. Yeah.
there are umpteen number of opportunities of making money which will come your way, you just need to do those things which makes you comfortable and sleep peacefully at night.
Yeah.
In the end, if you broadly look at people who manage money, more than managing capital, it's how you are managing your own time. And the way I look at it, I might have in the residual part of my life or journey, whether it's of my career, 1/3 of the time I will sleep, but naturally in a day.
Yep.
1/3 I'll give to my family. 1/3 I'll have to give professionally to my commitments, right? An investment. Now, within that 1/3, if I end up spending majority of my time firefighting for personality issues,
Yeah.
not focusing on business was cap table and have dealing with interpersonal issues, then that's not at all good use of my time. In the end, from a investing perspective, we are focused on power law, right? How can I maximize my outcome with the minimum of effort?
Yep.
So this particular thing of whether to partner with Michael or not, whether we gel or not, is a decision which is under my control. I ideally choose my partner very judiciously, and that's why even if the opportunity or the outcome potentially may seem to be large,
Yeah.
if I don't think I will get along with that person, I will not get into that relationship, because I will not do justice both to the founder and the company and my capital.
Yeah, I agree. Look, at some level, net negative, right? Because if it's taking too much energy, even if it at the end of the day makes you a ton of money, it's also taking away from, like you said, like your mental focus on the things that you really should be focusing on, and make one miss other opportunities because you're so focused on this thing. And I agree. This gets back to this idea of minimizing noise and finding signals. You just want to get rid of the noise, I think. So it's a theme, I think, here. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's not about, see, nothing is done deal as you were mentioning in
Yeah.
investing, right?
Yep.
It's the potential of making money.
Yeah.
You can still say, okay, tomorrow you will get that money. It's not that case, right? It's in 5, 7, 10 years time, you will end up making a large amount of money. You don't know it at point of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you need to assign probability. Jeff Bezos has a concept called as, it's a framework where you see whether are you losing out on stuff, regret minimization framework. So when you apply that, you will realize it's better off not to get into those transactions than thinking it will work out. It never eventually works out.
At some level, yeah, it doesn't work out. I want to talk about strategies for scaling production and market reach, but how do you get there in a way that's sustainable?
No, that's a very good question. Given till couple of years back, there was too much capital sloshing around the
Yeah.
entire environment.
Not just in India, but I mean globally, right? It was just like way too
Globally,
much money.
yes, yes. Globally, too much capital was sloshing around, and undercapitalization is bad. Overcapitalization is even more bad.
Yeah.
It's worse, and that's what the industry has seen, unfortunately. So I think one of the key things that we focus in when we invest in a founder and an opportunity, has the team seen bad times?
Yeah. Yeah.
Has the team worked in a resource constrained environment?
Exactly.
Because 2 decades of investing experience has taught me, when things are bad, if people survive and they have figured it out, then when things are good, they will still be level headed and will figure it out. They will not raise just for the heck of raising capital at a outrageous valuation. And which loops back to your point, we like people, founders and companies who are capital efficient, who value capital, and who will phase it out from a learning perspective, how much to burn, how much to risk a certain capital on a particular business idea to figure things out if that will work out or not.
Yeah.
That's very important.
Yeah. We used to talk about this a lot. We were hiring traders for the trading desk. Like, have you ever traded in a bear market? Like, do you know how to make money when the market's going down or when the environment is unstable? Anybody can make money in an equity market that's just going up. You just keep buying stocks, right? That's the easy part. But if you've never had any kind of problem or existed in a problematic market, then how do I know that when things get hard, you're going to be able to survive? And I think it's the same thing in this early stage startup stuff. Have you ever had to overcome a problem? And if you have, like, that's one of the first questions we used to ask traders is, have you ever had a bad experience? Have you ever had to overcome a problem? And if you did, how? And I think it's valid here as well. Yeah?
Absolutely. I agree.
Can we talk about this? I want to talk a little bit about deep tech, right? Because this is the other thing I think about too. When I look at things to invest in, or when I talk to founders, like one of the things I think about a lot is like, are you creating a solution to a problem that doesn't exist, that's looking for a problem? Or are you actually solving like real world problems in a way that's unique? How do you evaluate that?
So I'll lend some India perspective to it,
Yep.
given that the focus of our discussion is on India. So broadly from our stable of Inflexo Ventures, we look at two broad pockets or strategies. One is there is an existing large market, which is proven, where there are a bunch of incumbents who have been serving this market for a long period of time. You have a new innovative idea or a startup or a product coming up, which is disrupting the status quo and taking market share in an existing large market from the incumbents. That is one bucket of ideas that we focus on.
Yep.
So, some segments that I could say which falls in this bucket is logistics. Right. Huge market growing at twice the rate of a GDP. There are large incumbents who are serving that market very well. But if you see, when COVID came, although it got fully disrupted to a greater extent on the logistics space, there were some startups who solved it in a very innovative way using technology, and they got a great traction.
Yeah.
That's just one example. On the other side, you have another bucket where completely new markets are being created, where something path breaking is being done on some of the technology front, which will gradually open up new markets and might take a larger time to achieve that scale of market size.
Right.
Going into that idea, the market might seem small. Just to give you an example, the cybersecurity market on the automobile side in a country like India is
Yeah.
a very nascent market. In US, it's a large market, but it came into the limelight when the Jeep vehicle got hacked, and then people came into the light. There was a recall from the OEMs, and that market in the US is now a very large market. But it is very imminent that this segment will only go because it will impact insurance, it will impact financing, it is anyway will be impacting safety and security of the passengers. Now, this is one segment where we ended up investing in India in a company called Secure Things, which is trying to solve. It's a software product company working with the OEMs and trying to solve for this in a very nascent and a niche market which is not there in India today.
Can you talk to me a little bit more about this? This is something that's been interesting to me for a long time, right? Not just the cybersecurity part, but automobiles. I'm sure you've thought about this, but automobiles themselves as like a digital platform. So can you talk maybe at more scale about, because you're right, today cybersecurity as it relates to automobiles is a small market, but as cars become more connected, I said cars, but I mean any kind of moving vehicle, any kind of mobility thing, right, becomes more connected, a bunch of things happen. But one of them is they become now more of a target for this type of cybersecurity, but they also become more of a platform. Can you talk about that to its scale and how you think about it?
No, absolutely. So first of all, any segment which is large and
Yep.
where there are incumbents present, there are huge barriers or walls which are created for any new entrant to come up.
For sure.
Right, for sure. Elon Musk has disrupted it in a very different way. And he's a unique personality to disrupt the automobile market through Tesla, right?
Right.
But each and every segment of the auto sector, the cycle of sales or to prove something is just at least a 18 to 2 years long cycle where you have to prove efficacy to one of the large OEMs that your product works. And once you vet that, it becomes important to ensure you remain agnostic to the OEM. If you serve, Daimler, you should be also have the ability to go to the Toyotas and the Suzukis and say, okay, why don't you use mine? You need to ensure that nobody gets into a preferential relationship, then others will not work with you.
Yeah.
So there are dynamics, sectoral dynamics associated with it. For a platform play to work out, it is very important you remain carrier neutral.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm using a term from the telecom industry of carrier neutrality.
Yeah.
But that carrier neutrality platform play is very important when you're serving multiple large customers in some form or manner.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think about it in the same way you're talking about the telcos, right? So I carry this with me everywhere. So, and there are billions of these in the world, but there are just as many cars. I would submit to you that a lot of people that have this also have a car. But if you're in your car or even in somebody else's car, now you're in this mobile platform that can be used for things that have never been used before because throughput's improving, connectivity's improving. The way people look at mobility is really different. I spent a lot of time talking to insurers and insurtechs and stuff like that, thinking about like what the impact of all this tech is on that mobility sector, but also as a platform. I see that mobility becoming a e-commerce platform. Like all these things are going to happen there. And I just wonder what you think the result of all this or the impact of this is going to be, particularly as you mentioned, right? Like this is a completely new market. Even though the cars already exist, they haven't been used for this thing before. It seems like a great place to be investing.
Absolutely. The other segment which you just briefly touched upon, the segment which would get hugely impacted will be motor insurance
Yeah,
and
for sure.
underwriting motor risk.
Yeah.
Till now, motor insurance was pretty plain vanilla, right? Now, when
Yep.
you are looking for third-party insurance, accident insurance, how do you assess accident claim? Has it happened because of manual errors or somebody hacked into your system over the air and has played around with the system, which has led to some accident, and then there are damages, consequential damages because of that. So that is one area where the policies, the regulation on the auto side need to sync up with the risk framework and the underwriting framework of the insurance companies. And that is one risk which the insurance companies cannot ignore. And that's the reason it becomes very important having a uniform platform with common protocols and standards.
Yeah.
It helps in underwriting a standard policy. Otherwise, the policy framework and the risk framework for every policy will be different. And insurance works on the basis of homogeneity in the policy rather than uniqueness, because if it is unique, then it will be expensive. Whereas you would want to lower the insurance cost for more and more people to take up, right?
Yeah, and again, I was holding up my phone for you before, and I was saying like people own a lot of these. Like the radio that's in here is pretty standard, right? Made by one or few companies. The chip that's in here is pretty standard. Now you have a software platform that runs on top of it, and I do think the same thing's going to happen in the mobility space. The other interesting thing from an insurance perspective, and I know it's a little bit of a left turn, no pun intended, from what we kind of intended to talk about, but I'm curious what you think about this. Who even owns the car? Right? So then who has to pay for the insurance as well leaves a lot of room for investment in all of those things related to that mobility and the mobility insurance too, right? And as new products get invented and created, and I'm not talking about insurance products yet, like scooters and other things that are now IoT enabled, right? Because they're connected. How does insurance interact with that? To me, it's just a really cool conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's very early days, but a lot of OEMs have to interact with product companies such as these to come to a common framework and then make the insurers understand that framework, because they are used to of operating in a certain framework, get their buy-in, because just the way the auto sector is very slow, bureaucratic, financial sector is even slower.
Yeah.
And so it's like you are getting two mammoths interact with each other. And that will definitely take its own sweet time, is what I believe. So changes will be incremental
Yep.
and very gradual in this space.
It's so funny you say this. Like, I have the largest insurtech podcast in the world. Like, that's just a fact, right? So I spend a lot of time talking to insurers. And it's interesting to me the way, you're right, the way they perceive the mobility space. You notice I don't say car companies anymore because it just encompasses so many more devices than just like a car or a truck, at least the way I think about it. And you're right, they're going to have to change the framework within which they think about how do we provide insurance products for the modern world when mobility is changing at scale. It's just a really interesting conversation. Okay, I want to ask you this too. Do you think about how is this investment that I make in this company that could become wildly successful going to have a positive, negative, middling impact on society? Like, do you think about this when you're making investments?
Absolutely. And there are numerous examples from our portfolio itself. So, for example, one of our widely successful investments from a portfolio is a company called Atomberg Technologies.
Okay.
Right? That company, when we invested, when the founders were still in the entrepreneurship cell of their at IIT Bombay, they were making BLDC motors with incremental power controls through microprocessors and softwares.
Wow.
So the end use of their platform technology was how do you reduce the energy consumption of appliances. And they applied that tech first in cold storage, figured it out, okay, it's difficult to scale. Then they pivoted it and applied that same technology to consumer tech appliances.
Yep.
And in the Asian context, you have a ceiling fan, right, which runs during summers and all. So they were able to reduce the power consumption of a ceiling fan by almost 65%.
Wow.
When it got applied at scale, the amount of power that a domestic household saved was just huge and created a lot of energy efficiency play. And the same ceiling fans were also used in the industrial setup, whether it is in hospitals, warehouses, in textile, to dry the finished product. So any power consumption saved there directly is to improve their ROI and ROE. So eventually our bet was, if the world or the globally we are moving to an energy efficient environment,
Yeah.
every power saved is also a different means of reducing your carbon footprint. And that was their going in thesis, and which has played out exceedingly well. So this is just one of the examples that I can quote from our portfolio. There are a bunch of others which I'm happy to highlight, right? But for sure, this particular thinking goes into it. Okay, is there any incremental advantage which the consumer will derive, for which they need not pay, but it is just a frictionless process which will make the user say, between these two products, I might as well go with it because it is much more better for the environment.
Yeah, I love this. I love these companies. Look, I think if you go back 100 years, right, people were just busy inventing things to make life better for the rest of the world. And there was not a lot of consideration on sort of resource constraints and efficiency. And that's fair, right? Because back then, 100 years ago, there weren't a lot of like motor powered things that made people's lives better. But now that we're at a point where we're thinking, okay, what is going to be the impact on society and on the planet going to be? We can go back and look at all of the things we've invented over time and say, if we can just make the motor more efficient, and I'm simplifying just to make the point,
Yeah.
which brings up tons of opportunities, right? I used to say, the guy who designed windshield wipers on a car never went into a bar and got a date from a lady by going, yeah, I'm the windshield wiper designer, because it just didn't seem cool. But now it actually is kind of cool because the intricacies of building something like that that's more efficient actually is really important. You understand the point I'm trying to make?
Absolutely. I completely agree with you because these incremental improvements will have a huge impact
Yeah.
going forward, which was taken for granted. And then you realize if these things could have been done 20 years back, 2 decades back, the delta would have been, it's like compounding, right?
Yeah.
Incremental savings over a longer period of time has a huge compounding effect. So the concept of investing and compounding loops back into this approach.
Before I let you go, there's a bunch of other things I want to talk to you about, but I don't want to take up a ton more of your time. When you look at potential investments, are you sector agnostic? Do you care about specific sectors because we just talked about this, right? There are efficiencies you can drag out of any industry, but are there places where you think like, I'm just so interested in this thing, like whether it's healthcare, energy, or whatever, that I want to focus my investments there? Is that a thought you have, or you're kind of really agnostic about it? If someone comes with a great idea, you're happy to invest.
So we as a firm are sector agnostic, right?
Yep.
There are tons of ideas, irrespective of sectors, which come up to us. Our primary focus is we are horizontally focused on technology and innovation across any sector. And the objective is the differentiation that the product, irrespective of the sector, is providing. Does it have a defensibility or a head start over competition?
Right.
That becomes more important for us in making that decision. Should I look at that opportunity or not? Second, it is not all venture or business ideas are venture fundable.
For sure.
What has happened in the last 2, 3 years or 5 years, because of a lot of availability of liquidity, all kinds of business have got venture funding,
That shouldn't have, yeah.
which ideally shouldn't have.
Yeah.
They should have been bootstrapped or a friends
Yep.
and family round, and you just grind it out over a period of time, make it a profitable cash flow business or a lifestyle business.
Yep.
So we also do this assessment irrespective of sector, whether the business and the business model is venture fundable, or eventually it will remain a subscale business or a lifestyle business. If it is, then again, we will not invest in it. That's very clear from our side.
I got it. Can I ask you this? I feel like IC meetings, right? Like investment committee meetings should be a ton of fun, right? Because it's just like this massive exchange of ideas. Nobody dies. You know what I mean? If you make the investment or you don't make the investment, nobody dies. And it's not even like a chess game where like somebody wins or loses. It's more just like, why do you think that way? And change my mind. Like, is it fun when you go through these meetings or not?
Yes, absolutely. Because it's very important to have diverse point of view.
Yep.
Right? So that you are not held strongly by your confirmatory biases, or it's always good to seek this confirming evidence.
Yeah.
So that it helps you re-vet your hypothesis. And that's where the engineering bent of mind helps.
Right.
Because every hypothesis, you will work it out and see whether it works out or not from an expected value perspective, right? So obviously investment committee discussions are fun because everybody comes with a different perspective. And in the end, the goal is same, to get a winnable idea or to back an idea which can create tons of money for our investors in a fiduciary role, because that's the common goal that each of us are playing to.
Yeah.
And that's the reason for sure investment committee discussion helps a lot in crystallizing that to a greater extent.
I think so as well. Okay. Pratip Mazumdar, a partner and co-founder at Inflexor Ventures. This was awesome. What I'd like to have, and I really appreciate you coming and doing this today, I'd love to have some of your really cool portfolio companies come on the show as well. You don't have to tell me now, but just like when we're done doing this, think about it.
Sure.
And then I'd love to go through a few of them and just have them come back. I really appreciate your time today. This was super great.
Absolutely. So I'll drop you a line with 2, 3 of my portfolio companies. You look up on them on the net. You might find the founders in the company interesting. Happy to make those introductions and you can take it up.
Awesome. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Michael. Have a nice day ahead.